Yes, good evening, everybody. It is really a pleasure and a privilege to see so many of you on my screen tonight. Just before I do get to the task at hand, just a couple of thank yous. Firstly, to Sarah, who has just been talking to us, our administrator, who's kept this event together organisationally. And secondly, I must thank my dear colleague, Adrian Olker, our Chair of Trustees, who put this evening together in the first place. PCN Britain is the largest membership organisation for those who take a progressive view of the way of Jesus in the UK today. And I'm not embarrassed to say that if you're not already a member, we'd love you to join us. It's perhaps regrettable, but it's true all the same that the more members we have, the more we're able to have a voice in important discussions that affect all of us. So please do consider joining if you're not already a member. Hopefully you will also hear later from our newest trustee, my colleague Jackie Wiegman, who will give our vote of thanks. But before we get to that, my biggest thank you, of course, must go to the man who will speak to us tonight. So when I was given the task of introducing Richard Holloway this evening, I realised that I really couldn't think of anything to say that others haven't already said in 100 different ways, apart from perhaps that he's a man who knows how to wear a turtleneck. I must describe Richard as a multiply successful, critically acclaimed author, journalist and broadcaster who has a searingly honest and beautifully poetic way. And in that way, he has charted his own journey of spiritual and personal development. And it's a journey that's taken him through the landscape of devotion and doubt and into a place where those two strands are somehow held together in a kind of loose tension. He seems to me to be someone who has learned one of life's most difficult lessons, how to become comfortable with the uncomfortable. So to some, Richard Holloway is a generous and compellingly honest spiritual guide. To others, he's a towering intellectual who maintains the ability in his 9th decade to talk with tremendous insight and erudition about all manners of subjects. And perhaps he's best understood as both of those things. Not content with releasing a book in the teeth of the pandemic last year, his most recent book was officially released, I think, just 4 days ago, The Heart of Things. And it's described as an anthology of memory and lament. And it's that which he plans to talk to us about tonight. So please do join me in your own splendid isolation in welcoming all the way from his home in Edinburgh, Richard Holloway.
Thank you. Am I now being heard? Because I'm a bit of a klutz with this. Okay. What I'm going to do is read something which is on my screen above my wife's iPad. So if I can look a bit odd, that's why I'm looking at a screen. But thank you so much for that introduction. And it's a pleasure to be a part of another PCN event. This book is what is called an anthology. As the word suggests, a gathering of flowers plucked from other people's gardens, especially poets. The word poetry comes from the Greek to make. Make what? Well, among other meanings, to make present again what is past, bring it back to mind, remember it. In this, the art of poetry is like the art of photography, a point made by Philip Larkin, one of the poets, anthologized in my book, himself a master of both. Still with Larkin, when I pick up his wonderful curation of poetry, the Oxford Book of 20th Century English Verse, it always opens at the same page because it holds a long stem of dried lavender that I placed there years ago to mark my first reading of what is now an important poem to me, The Burning of the Leaves by Lawrence Binyon. That's what an anthology is. That's what an anthology does. It is a collection of poetic flowers that saved or enlarged the life of the reader. This is my collection, but I'll leave the last word to Michel de Montaigne, history's greatest anthologist. It could be said of me that in this book, I have only made up a bunch of other men's flowers, providing of my own only the string that ties them together. My book comes in 6 interconnected themes or moods that capture the feel of a lived life: passing, mourning, warring, ruining, regretting, and forgiving. The title, The Heart of Things, comes from the Roman poet Virgil in his epic, The Aeneid, which describes the escape of Aeneas from ruined Troy and the long journey that brings him to Rome. In one of the pauses on his journey, he gazes at a mural in a temple that depicts the death of some of his friends and countrymen in the Trojan War, and he cries out, "En priamus, sunt lacrimae rerum et mentem mortalia tangunt," which can be loosely translated as, there's Priam. There are tears at the heart of things, and the fleeting nature of everything overwhelms the mind. Hence the title. It's about the sadness we sometimes feel at the thought of our lives fleeing into the past. And that's the subject of the first chapter, which I've called Passing. The thought of time widening behind us like the wake of a ship and diminishing in front of us as we draw closer to port can prompt the kind of reflective sorrow we call melancholy. Melancholy is the mood that invades us when we realize how time is drifting away from us into the past, always into the past. And what distinguishes melancholy from depression is that there is a strange pleasure in melancholy. That said, it's not easy to define the precise nature of the pleasure that melancholy delivers. Can a pleasure be a hurt at the same time? In my experience, yes. And one of its most piercing forms is remembering a relationship in the past and being sad, not only that it is past, but because you were not fully attentive to it when it was present. It can happen in many different relationships, but the most poignant is looking back at your children when they were young and realizing how absent you were at significant moments in their lives. This is a realization parents notice with particular intensity. And here's an example from the Irish poet Evan Boland. This is called The Necessity for Irony. On Sundays when the rain held off, after lunch or later, I would go with my 12-year-old daughter into town and put down the time at junk sales, antique fairs. There I would lean over tables absorbed by lace, wooden frames, glass. My daughter stood at the other end of the room, her flame-colored hair obvious whenever, which was not often, I turned around. I turned around, she was gone, grown, no longer ready to come with me whenever a dry Sunday held out its promises of small histories, endings. When I was young, I studied styles, their use and origin, which age was known for which ornament, and was always drawn to a lyric speech, a civil tone, but never thought I would have the need, as I do now, for a darker one. Spirit of irony, my caustic author of the past of memory, and of its pain, which returns, hurts, stings. Reproach me now, remind me that I was in those rooms with my child, with my back turned to her, searching, oh irony, for beautiful things. Remembering incidents in the past like this is what the Scottish poet W.S. Graham did one day on the edge of old age when he went up the hill behind Greenock, where he had been born, to visit Loch Tom. Just for the sake of recovering, I walked backward from 56 quick years of age, wanting to see, and managed not to trip or stumble, to find Loch Tom, and turned round to see the stretch of my childhood before me. Here is the loch. The same long beaked cry curls across the weather edges of the water held between the hills a boyhood's walk up from Greenock. It is the morning, and I am here with my mammy's bramble jam scones in my pocket. The firth is miles, and I have come back to find Loch Tom maybe in this light does not recognize me. And almost I am back again, wading in the heather down to the edge to sit. The minnows go by in shoals like iron filings in the shallows. My mother is dead, my father is dead, and all the trout I used to know leaping from their sad rings are dead. I drop my crumbs into the shallow weed for the minnows and pinheads. You see that I will have to rise and turn round and get back where my running age will slow for a moment to let me on. It is a colder stretch of water than I remember. The curlew's cry, traveling still, kills me fairly. In front of me, the grouse flurry and settle. Go back, go back, go back. Farewell, Loch Tom. But why do this? Why heed the call of the poet to go back, go back? Interrogating my own experience suggests that it is because the actual process of living is like watching a movie that can never be paused, only rewound, and only when it's nearly over and it is too late. Our good fortune and our tragedy are that though we cannot stop the present to bless it as time runs on, we can go back in memory to mourn and hallow it when it is over. That is the sweet hurt poets are brilliant at capturing. Its main note is a mournful recognition that all things come to an end, that every summer passes into winter and every life into death. Sometimes our mourning is marked with defiance and a refusal to be resigned to it, but mourning it remains. Here is an example of protest from the American poet Edna St. Vincent Millay. I am not resigned to the shutting away of loving hearts in the hard ground. So it is, and so it will be, for so it has been time out of mind. Into the darkness they go, the wise and the lovely, crowned with lilies and with laurel they go. But I am not resigned. Lovers and thinkers, into the earth with you. Be one with the dull, the indiscriminate dust. A fragment of what you felt, of what you knew, a formula, a phrase remains, but the best is lost. The answers quick and keen, the honest look, the laughter, the love, they are gone. They are gone to feed the roses. Elegant and curled is the blossom, fragrant is the blossom, I know, but I do not approve. More precious was the light in your eyes than all the roses in the world. Down, down, down into the darkness of the grave, gently they go. The beautiful, the tender, the kind. Quietly they go. The intelligent, the witty, the brave. I know, but I do not approve, and I am not resigned. Defiance is one response to all that going down into the darkness of the grave and the fading of everything into the past. So is hope, but it has a very different feel. Genuine hope is tentative, wistful. There might even be a touch of desperation in it. Wishing won't give us another life beyond death, but who can condemn us for trying? The laureate of this kind of longing was the English poet John Betjeman. And here he is, raising his voice, not in defiance, but in a kind of hope. The sky widens to Cornwall, a sense of sea hangs in the lichenous branches, and still there's light. The road from its tunnel of blackthorn rises free to a final height. And over the west is glowing a mackerel sky, whose opal fleece has faded to purple pink. In this hour of the late lit listening evening, why do my spirits sink? The tide is high, and a sleepy Atlantic sends exploring ripple on ripple down palsy's shore, and the gathering dark is full of the thought of friends I shall see no more. Where is Anne Channel, who loved this place the best, with her tense blue eyes and her shopping bag falling apart, and her racy gossip and 1920 zest, and that warmth of heart? Where's Roland, easing his most unwieldy car with its load of golf clubs backwards into the lane? Where's Kathleen Stoke with her ciliums? There's Dunbar, Bray Hill shows plain. For this is the turn, and the well-known trees draw near. On the road, their pattern in moonlight fades and swells. As the engine stops, from 2 miles off, I hear St. Minver bells. What a host of stars in a wideness still and deep. What a host of souls as a motorbike winds away and the silver snake of the estuary curls to sleep in Dama Bay. Are they one with the Celtic saints and the years between? Can they see the moonlit pools where ribbonweed drifts? As I reach our hill, I am part of a sea unseen, and oppression lifts. As well as poetry, another way of capturing the past is through photography, which is why I decided to illustrate this book with old photographs and to include a poem by Philip Larkin, who was a great photographer as well as a great poet. It's called Lines on a Young Lady's Photograph Album. But oh, photography, as no art is, faithful and disappointing, that records dull days as dull and hold its smiles as frauds, and will not censor blemishes like washing lines and Hall's distemper boards, but shows the cat as disinclined and shades the chin as doubled when it is. What grace your candor thus confers upon her face! How overwhelmingly persuades that this is a real girl in a real place, in every sense empirically true. Or is it just the past, those flowers, that gate, these misty parks and motors lacerate simply by being over? You contract my heart by looking out of date. Yes, true, but in the end, surely we cry not only at exclusion, but because it leaves us free to cry. We know what was won't call on us to justify our grief, however hard we yowl across the gap from eye to page. So I am left to mourn without a chance of consequence, you balanced on a bike against a fence, to wonder if you'd spot the theft of this one of you bathing, to condense in short a past that now no one can share. No matter who's your future, calm and dry, it holds you like a heaven, and you lie invariably lovely there, smaller and clearer as the years go by. What Larkin understood about photography was that, like poetry, it captured the past and broke the heart in doing so. Those flowers, that gate, those misty parks and motors lacerate simply by being over. You contract my heart by looking out of date. Much, if not most, of the suffering that causes us to mourn is caused by our own actions, our compulsive violence and incessant warring against each other, and we'll remember it all again on Thursday, on Armistice Day. That is why on Armistice Day, the silence followed by the lament of the bagpipes over the killing fields where now only poppies grow still touches our hearts with its terrible beauty. This is a strong theme in Scottish writing, and nowhere is it more poignantly expressed than in Scotland's favourite novel, the prose poem Sunset Song, written by Lewis Grassic Gibbon in 1932. It all happens in Kinraddy, an estate without a laird that has fallen on hard times, lying in the How of the Mearns on the road from Stonehaven to Lawrencekirk in Aberdeenshire. In the horrors of the Great War, Kinraddy is not spared. 4 local men are killed in the conflict. The war over, Kinraddy gathers to hear its new young minister, Robert Cahoon, who had himself fought in the trenches, dedicate the memorial to Kinraddy's fallen. And here's how it's described in the book. And then, with the night waiting out by on Blawery Bree, and then with the night waiting out by on Blawery Bray, and the sun just verging the coarse hills, the minister began to speak again, his short hair blowing in the wind that had come, his voice not decent and a kirk-like bumble, but ringing out over the loch. For I will give you the morning star. In the sunset of an age and an epoch, we may write that for epitaph of the men who were of it. They went quiet and brave from the lands they loved, though seldom of that love might they speak. It was not in them to tell in words of the earth that moved and lived and abided, their life and enduring love. And who knows at the last what memories of it were with them, the springs and the winters of this land, and all the sounds and scents of it that had once been theirs, deep and a passion of their blood and spirit, those 4 who died in France. With them, we may say there died a thing older than themselves. These were the last of the peasants, the last of the old Scots folk. A new generation comes up that will know them not except as a memory and a song. They pass with the things that seem good to them, with loves and desires that grow dim and alien in the days to be. It was the old Scotland that perished then, and we may believe that never again will the old speech and the old songs, the old curses and the old benedictions rise but with alien effort to our lips. The last of the peasants, these 4 that you knew, took that with them to the darkness and quietness of the places where they sleep. And the land changes. Their parks and their steadings are a desolation where the sheep are pastured. We are told that great machines come soon to till the land, and the great herds come to feed on it. The crofter is gone, the man with the house and the steading of his own, and the land closer to his heart than the flesh of his body. Nothing, it has been said, is true but change. Nothing abides. And here in Kinraddy, where we watch the building of those little prides and those little fortunes on the ruins of the little farms, we must give heed that these also do not abide, that a new spirit shall come to the land with the greater herd and the great machines. For greed of place and possession and great estate, these 4 had little heed. The kindness of friends and the warmth of toil and the peace of rest, they asked no more from God or man, and no less would they endure. So lest we shame them, let us believe that the new oppressions and foolish greeds are no more than mists that pass. They died for a world that is past these men, but they did not die for this that we seem to inherit. Beyond it and us, there shines a greater hope and a newer world undreamt when these four died. But need we doubt which side the battle they would range themselves did they live today? Need we doubt the answer they cry to us even now, the four of them from the places of the sunset? And then the Highland man MacIver tuned up his pipes and began to step slow round the stone circle by Blaweary Loch, slow and quiet, and folk watched him. The dark was near. It lifted your hair and was eerie and uncanny, the flowers of the forest as he played it. It rose and rose and wept and cried, that crying for the men that fell in battle. I've heard them lilting at our ewe milking, lassies a lilting before dawn o' day. But now they are moaning on ilka green loaning, the flowers of the forest are all weed away. Dool and way for the order sent our lads to the border. The English for ains by guile won the day. The flowers of the forest that fought I the foremost, the pride o'er land, lie cold in the clay. And I hope you'll forgive me for an anti-English sentiment in that very old Scottish poem. It brings me to my next theme, chapter 4 in the book called Ruining, because war is not the only human activity that provokes human sorrow and loss. Here's a famous poem from Shelley that tells another part of the story. I met a traveler from an antique land who said, two vast and trunkless legs of stone stand in the desert. Near them on the sand, half sunk, a shattered visage lies, whose frown and wrinkled lip and sneer of cold command tell that its sculptor well those passions read, which yet survive, stamped on these lifeless things. The hand that mocked them and the heart that fed. And on the pedestal, these words appear. My name is Ozymandias, King of Kings. Look on my works, ye mighty, and despair. Nothing beside remains. Round the decay of that colossal wreck, boundless and bare, the lone and level sands stretch far away. We've heard that boast many times down the years. You only have to delete the name Ozymandias and fill in the blank from any period in history to get the message. It's the obvious way to read his poem. The proud boasts of power all fail in the end. But poetry, like scripture, can be read in many ways. So I want to give Shelley's poem another meaning, because it is not only power that passes, the architecture of power passes too. Its forts and fortresses fall into ruin. And not just the architecture of power, the architecture of faith also crumbles. Its temples turn to dust. It's a melancholy fact that what our creative genius prompts us to build, our destructive genius compels us to destroy. That is why the earth is strewn with ruins, many of them redundant churches. The archetypal ruined city has to be Jerusalem, the sacred place that has been fought over for centuries and is still contested today. Oh, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, killing the prophets and stoning those who are sent to you. How often would I have gathered your children together as a hen gathers her brood under her wings, and you would not. Behold, your house is forsaken and desolate. In these verses, Matthew was lamenting the destruction of Jerusalem by the Romans in the year 70. But that was only one incident. in a long record that shows little sign of ending. It is almost as if this ancient city on a hill had been established by the cosmic tragedian as a symbol of humanity's passion for creating beauty and compulsively destroying the beauty it had created. The Bible has a whole book of poems mourning Jerusalem's derelictions. Called the Book of Lamentations, it mourns the destruction of Jerusalem in 587 BCE by the Assyrians, one in a long line of desecrators. How lonely sits the city that was full of people. How like a widow has she become, she that was great among the nations. She that was a princess among the cities has become a vassal. She weeps bitterly in the night, tears on her cheeks. Among all her lovers, she has none to comfort her. All her friends have dealt treacherously with her. They have become her enemies. And on it goes, Jerusalem, the tragic symbol for all our loves and hatreds. And there she still stands, fought over, hated, and loved. Which brings me to the 5th chapter and theme in the book, the theme of regret. No wonder regret is such a strong emotion in human life. Speaking personally, I love the very sound of the word, but I'm running out of time, so let me read you a couple of poems from this chapter on regret, both from Louis MacNeice, one of my favorite poets. When MacNeice was 5, his mother disappeared from his life into hospital without explanation and died. Here's the poem he wrote about it, looking back. In my childhood, trees were green and there was plenty to be seen. Come back early or never come. My father made the walls resound. He wore his collar the wrong way round. Come back early or never come. My mother wore a yellow dress, gentle, gently, gentleness. Come back early or never come. When I was 5, the black dreams came. Nothing after was quite the same. Come back early or never come. The dark was talking to the dead. The lamp was dark beside my bed. Come back early or never come. When I woke, they did not care. Nobody was there. Come back early or never come. When my silent terror cried, nobody replied. Come back early or never come. I got up, the chilly sun saw me walk away alone. Come back early or never come. And here's the second MacNeice poem I want to read. I am not yet born, O hear me. Let not the blood-sucking bat or the rat or the stoat or the club-footed gull come near me. I am not yet born, console me. I fear that the human race may with tall walls wall me, with strong drugs dope me, with wise lies lure me, on black racks rack me, in bloodbaths roll me. I am not yet born, provide me with water to dandle me, grass to grow for me, trees to talk to me, sky to sing to me, birds and a white light in the back of my mind to guide me. I am not yet born, forgive me for the sins that in me the world shall commit. My words when they speak me, my thoughts when they think me, my treason engendered by traitors beyond me, my life when they murder by means of my hands, my death when they live me. I am not yet born, forgive me for the sins that in me the world shall commit. And that brings me to the final chapter in the book called Forgiving. In my experience reading poetry, sometimes a single line gives us what we need. I came across such a line in Ian Crichton Smith's selected poems, a Scottish poet. I wasn't grabbed by the poem itself, She Teaches Lear, but in the third line of the last verse, it was waiting for me. This single line, from our own weakness only are we kind. From our own weakness only are we kind. Of course, only admitting our own weaknesses will make us kind, help us identify with others of our own kind and act as kin to kin. And it has to apply to our relationship with the self. We have to learn how to be kin or kind to ourselves. And it's a hard one to pull off. Thrown into existence, loaded with tendencies and dispositions we didn't ask for, we play the hand we are dealt, usually not very well. But we are not the only ones who failed and needed forgiveness. It has been true of every generation that passed over the face of the earth. All have fallen short. Yet there have always been some who looked with compassion on their fellow humans. We call them metaphysicians, soul poets, artists who understand and love their own kind. And one of them was called Jesus. His poem for us was called Forgiveness. And like all necessary poetry, we find it when we need it. He used two different Greek verbs for it. One was aphiemi, which means letting someone off a debt. The other was apoluo, meaning to liberate or let someone out of jail, or redeem, as in releasing someone from slavery or getting something out of the pawn shop. For Jesus, forgiveness was a revolutionary act, but it was also a metaphor. It was a revolutionary act because it recognized how the economic system was stacked against the poor and always had been. But forgiveness was also a metaphor for the need to release the debts and imprisonments we inflict on each other in our personal lives. All of us, we arrive in life loaded with urges and needs that cause us to fall into damaging transactions with each other. We are born with all that inherited past pressing through us. Our tiny life is the point or opening through which it flows into and at our death out of time into the realm of the forgotten. On one level, the past that flows through us does not care about us, probably does not even know us. But as we increase in self-knowledge, we begin to understand how we came to be the person we have become. And in the process of becoming that person, accumulating huge levels of moral and personal debt to those we hurt in the complicated thrust of living out who we were becoming as we sped towards our own dying. And we either learn to forgive that debt or carry it as a grievance to the grave. If we choose to live in grievance, we lock ourselves in the prison of resentment. If we forgive, the gate unlocks and we walk into freedom. Jesus thought the unforgiven and unforgiving life were simply not worth living. It was up to us, of course, but if we chose forgiveness, it had to be habitual, not 7 times, but 70 times 7. It had to be a habitual way of being towards others and towards ourselves. Yes, towards the self. We have to learn to be kind towards our own weakness. The forgiven and the forgiving person has a certain lightness of being, a refusal to let heaviness and grievance and hate be the only or the dominant game. And it's so true of humanity, that grievance game, all that locking up, that banging away, that resentment, those fists in your face. Lighten up. Forgiveness smiles. Yes, forgiveness smiles. Forgiveness is a lightsome thing. Come on, it cries. Don't lead a heavy, resentful life. Lighten up. Which is why I'm going to end with a poem to the self, inviting it to lighten up, by Gerard Manley Hopkins, who didn't always listen to his own advice. But I'll leave it to each and every one of us to listen to again tonight. My own heart, let me more have pity on. Let me live to my sad self hereafter, kind, charitable, not live this tormented mind, with this tormented mind tormenting yet. Soul, self, come, poor Jack self. I do advise you, jaded, let be. Call off thoughts a while elsewhere. Leave comfort root room. Let joy sighs at God knows when, to God knows what, whose smiles not wrung see you, unforeseen times rather, as skies between pie mountains lights a lovely mile. Amen. And that's me done talking about my wee book.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Richard. That was wonderful. You might wonder what your whistle I was about to say, because we have had a few questions come through for you. And what I'd like to do, if possible, is just to put them to you on behalf of the folk who have written in. The first question comes from Sandra, who simply asks, what was it that first moved you to produce this anthology?
In the preface to the book, I mentioned the fact that someone once said to me, a good friend years ago said, your books, they're just strings of quotations with wee bits from you. And that is true. Looking back, all my books have been a conversation with other writers, and particularly poets. And something prompted me, I can't put my finger exactly on it, but as a kind of act of affection and tribute, I wanted to bring many of them together into one book as a kind of act of affection and gratitude for what they've meant to me over the years. Some of them go back a long way. Some of them are relatively recent, because the great thing about the journey through literature, the reading of poetry, the reading of scripture, which is what we're talking about here. Scripture is what people have written to try and make sense of their lives. So it was a kind of act of gratitude. And also because, I mean, during lockdown, lockdown didn't really bother me because I just sit away typing. And so I thought, well, I'll use this latest phase of lockdown to say thank you for all the lovely things I've read in my long and increasingly depleted life.
Wonderful, wonderful. Okay, well, so Nora has given us a question. She, first of all, and we all echo this, she says, thank you for your readings. And she follows on to say, many poets have written on regretting, fewer have written on ruining. Your most poignant inclusion, in Nora's opinion at least, is biblical, lamenting the ruins of Jerusalem. The question is, though, can you imagine any poet writing on Jerusalem in the 21st century?
Oh, what a wonderful question. It's hard to imagine it simply because it's such a contested place. I mean, the whole kind of Palestinian-Israeli dispute that divides households in our own country and divides politicians. It would need to be a wonderful lament, not a jaunty, kind of touristy kind of thing. I do wish someone would do it. I mean, I can't think of anyone immediately. I mean, if Larkin were around and interested, he might do, because Larkin did sorrow very well. He did despair. He lived in many ways in despair. So Larkin might manage it. but I can't think of anyone to do, but it should go out there. The word should go out. We need a lament about Jerusalem. We need a lament that's honest to all the sides in that ancient quarrel. And Jesus summed it up, oh, Jerusalem, Jerusalem. You could feel the beauty and the love in his heart, couldn't you? Those are tender words. How often would I have gathered you? Oh, God, yes. Yeah, someone has to do this. I'm scribbling a bit of poetry myself. I don't think I've got it in me, but I might even live with that for a wee bit and see if I can do it.
Well, that would be an unexpected treat, but we'll wait and see. No pressure. Okay. Well, Nicola asks a question. As we age, and her question is on the theme of lament as well, really. As we age and we lament the loss of fellow travellers with whom we share memories and understanding, can connections with younger generations help? Thinking of connections, particularly between generations over climate crisis, for example.
Yeah, one of the things that's encouraging has been seeing old grey heads and young, vigorous people marching together through the streets of Glasgow this weekend. So yes, I think you can get those connections, those political and kind of actual physical existential connections. My greatest I'm lucky enough to have a couple of grandchildren, and one's 18 and the other 16, and my connection with that generation is through them. I adore them. I wonder at the courage of this generation. They seem to me to be much more interesting than my generation was way back at that stage. It's partly because they're so connected, they're never off their phones or the various other forms of connection they have with each other. They seem to me to be lively, interested, aware. My generation, immediately after the Second World War, we were struggling to rebuild Britain in a sense. We'd broken it, that other great war in my life. So I think that yes, marching, listening, connecting, but also for me increasingly, because I don't do a lot of social interaction nowadays. I've always been a bit antisocial anyway, and I find at my age I can indulge it. But in reading, I read lots and lots of memoirs and diaries and journals, and it takes me back immediately into all these lives that have gone, the struggles they had, like my own struggles. So there are many ways of keeping that kind of flowing through time and looking back as I get nearer to port myself in gratitude, but also visiting how other people did it, because we're all ending up in the same place.
Yeah, that's a beautiful thought. Thank you. This question comes from Alison, and I'm really encouraged by the number of questions that are coming in from women this evening. Fantastic to hear. Usually at conferences, men sort of elbow their way into the front of the queue.
We're pushy buggers, men, aren't we? Yeah.
Present company accepted, obviously. But this question comes from Alison. Now she has a particular point of view, which would be interesting to hear your take on. Alison says, poetry is beautiful and can move us in many ways, as can scripture. But surely feelings are not what lasts. What lasts is how we are changed and impacted by what we read. Even progressive Christians must reach a place where our own heart meets with the heart of God and we are changed. How have these poems and scriptures brought you closer to the heart of God? I wonder what your take is on that.
Alison, my difficulty is that I'm not sure that there is a heart of God to be. I mean, a bit of me hopes there might be, that the universe came from such a loving heart, although that loving heart also seems to have created a universe that's full of hate and cruelty. And I watched the Channel 4 news tonight, and it's all about refugees trying to get into Europe. So I'm uncertain about a lot of that. So I can't give you an absolutely straightforward answer. It seems to me that poetry and scripture I read as a kind of poetry. It's the way humans have wrestled with this strange, mysterious life we're thrown into at birth without our permission. We're not given, except through other people's wrestlings, a guide to it. And some people are absolutely confident they know where it came from. It came from the mind of God, the creator. Others think it popped spontaneously into existence in the Big Bang. I find each of those as difficult as the other to hold, because I find it difficult to conceive of the universe simply popping into existence. On the other hand, I also find it difficult to believe that there is such a thing as an enduring eternal God who could be responsible for such a cruel yet glorious universe that he's created. So I'm caught in division between these two possibilities. One of the difficulties with the God hypothesis is that in many ways it's a leap in a logic chain. Every effect we say has a cause. The universe is an effect, so it must have a cause. Let's posit a supernatural being called God as the cause of the universe. You've solved the problem. Well, you haven't, because restless minds say, well, then who caused God? And of course, theologians then cheat and I say God is uncaused. Plato called God the uncaused God. God is just God in himselfness. And that satisfies many. And if it satisfies you and gives you purpose and compassion and courage and love and forgiveness, I will not seek to disturb that. But it doesn't work for everyone. The book I wrote before this one was called Stories We Tell Ourselves. And in that book, I confess to being both a theist and an atheist, because there's a solid argument for both of them. I think that ultimately, the test of our humanity is not so much what we believe, whether it's theism or atheism, but how we act, how we respond to others, the kindness, forgiveness, courage, compassion we show. The test is empirical. It's an unsatisfactory answer, but it's the way I've had to live with it, simply because I've spent most of my adult life wrestling between these two great opposing possibilities.
Yeah, thank you, Richard. That's a helpful and thoughtful answer, I think. I'm going to move on to onto the, well, I'm trying to decide whether to stick with lament or to move on to hope, but we'll give one more on lament, I think. This one comes from Tony. Given climate change, he says, do we need to think about how we lament for the earth, its passing, its ruination, and then forgiveness for what we have done to it?
Oh God, yes, we certainly do. And we are doing quite a lot of that. And of course, the people who are doing the most lamenting are the ones being destroyed by it, the ones where they're either being flooded or they're being desertified. All of that is certainly true. And in many ways, the one Christian doctrine I absolutely solidly believe in is what we call original sin, which is the fact that we humans are wonderful creatures. We're capable of great courage and compassion and creativity, but also capable of extraordinary cruelty and selfishness. And it's that selfishness that has created the problem that we're facing at the moment. I mean, we could, in fact, we're so messed up, we could, in fact, end up by doing ourselves in. And it may well be that the world is quietly saying, we can't live any longer with this species, these humans, let's get rid of them. And then the earth will come back into some kind of equilibrium with its own processes. Yeah. The doctrine of original sin is that there is something deeply flawed about humans, which means that there's always a kind of bias in their behavior. And so you have to be very wary. You have to be self-examining. You have to have a capacity for forgiveness. One of the things I've emphasized in a number of the books that I've written is simply because we don't know who we are. We don't know all the trends and tendencies that we've inherited, and they cause certain kinds of behavior. Hannah Arendt was great on this, as was Spinoza, these great philosophers. Hannah Arendt said, we don't know what we're doing when we're acting, but our actions have consequences, and the only possible way to reverse or stop the consequence of these immoderate actions is to learn forgiveness, not to let the thing run interrupted through history. But we don't learn it very easily. Hence, half the conflicts in the world between Sunni and Shia in the Middle East, between Catholics and Protestants in Northern Ireland, the great peace process of Nelson Mandela and Desmond Tutu recognized that. It was based on this notion of human fallibility. So you had to own the background and try and work towards a kind of peace and reconciliation. Climate change is perhaps the most profound and damaging of the human sins. I mean, I'll use Christian language. It's the one that could finally finish us off, as it's finishing off lots of parts of the world. It may never be too late to learn, but as everyone says, it's a minute to midnight. We do have resources in Scripture to help us make a challenge to our own idiocy. But I think the jury's out on whether we'll actually pull it off.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, it puts us in mind of the well, I'm not going to get the Latin right, but the line from the Gregorian chant, "In the midst of life, we are in death." And that's the ever real proposition.
Yeah.
So in this era then, Richard, of pandemic, lockdowns, climate chaos, enduring political villainy, and so on, where do you see hope?
Well, the thing that COVID taught us was that the closest thing we have to a national religion is the National Health Service. Those doctors and nurses that day after day put on the covering and looked after us. Astonishing, stunning. I mean, that's why we stood out on our doorsteps and cheered them those days ago. It's always been under-resourced, but it's probably the greatest political, and it came out of war. When Attlee and all those soldiers came back from World War II, they wanted to change society. And they delivered the National Health Service, imperfect as it is, because it's run by humans who are intrinsically imperfect. But my God, it exists to say that we in Britain get healthcare when we need it and not when we can pay for it. If you compare it with, I mean, I've got a daughter who lives in the States. My wife's an American. We're amazed at the lack of appetite for anything like a National Health Service over there, where it's run simply as an outrunner of capitalism. So yeah, I think gratitude for that. I still find, on the whole, British politics gentler than many other politics. I mean, there are big struggles between Scotland and England. There's a big struggle going on in Parliament at the moment. But I kind of like the way that we've actually maintained democracy. It's under threat at the moment. The era of the big tough guy is back. A lot of the countries in the world are run by dictatorships. It was an authoritarian dictator who was president of the United States until he was thrown out last year, and he could well be back. So I think that on the whole, I think that the thing about democracy is that it builds in opposition to government. That's the fundamental thing it teaches. And I think that's rooted almost in a kind of biblical pessimism about human nature. You can't trust us with power. And if Tony Benn, the great lamented Tony Benn, used to say to people, if you have power over me, I want to know when I can get rid of you when the time comes. governments. And that's one of the things we stumble towards in democracy, based on the doctrine of original sin, that if people are in power, there needs to be a mechanism why they can be thrown out, the government can be reversed, and they can be challenged. So you have the loyal opposition. And imperfect as it is, different as there are between issues in England and Scotland, I'm glad I live in a democracy, imperfect though it is, because there is a chance of power always being challenged. I'd rather not live in China or in Russia or in some of those other countries run by hard men, because their power is beyond challenge. So yeah, I'm grateful for that, imperfect as it is.
Yeah, thank you. That's a very positive reminder of not to take for granted that which we do have. As we sort of begin to draw to a close, then I'd like, if I may, to take you back to your book, and in a sense, I suppose what it does, almost a sort of desert island discs job. It really kind of celebrates so many of the things that that so many of the writers and the poems and images that you've loved. And one of the things that makes you such a kind of compelling writer and speaker is the way that you draw upon this enormous range of cultural references. But you have consistently shown a particular affinity for poetry, and the way that it accesses a realm of meaning that prose can't quite manage. So if you were on that desert island, or if you had to escape with one book in your hand, is there a particularly well-thumbed book that you would snatch down from the shelf and take with you?
Yes, yeah. And here it is. It would be the Oxford Book of 20th Century English Verse, curated by Philip Larkin, himself a great poet. It's a very eccentric collection, but I couldn't live without it. It opens at a number of places for me. One of my favorite poems, a life-saving poem, The Burning of the Leaves, I put in it years ago a stem of lavender. So when I take it down from the shelf, it opens at page 102, The Burning of the Leaves by Lawrence Binyon. I don't know whether you want me to read it, but it also opens at a lovely poet called John Mead Faulkner, who wrote a lovely poem about the Christian year. And it's a very Anglican poem. I'd quite like to read it. Have I got time?
Oh, yes, you've got time. Yeah, please do. We'd love it.
It's called After Trinity. In the old days, Sundays were after Trinity, not after Pentecost. When the Anglican Church changed the prayer book and created new services, it moved from after Trinity to after Pentecost. But John Mead Faulkner wrote this poem called After Trinity. Let me read it to you. It's a nice Anglican, old-fashioned poem. We have done with dogma and divinity, Easter and Whitsun past. The long, long Sundays after Trinity are with us at last. The passionless Sundays after Trinity, neither feast day nor fast. Christmas comes with plenty, Lent spreads out its pall, but these are 25, the longest Sundays of all, the placid Sundays after Trinity, wheat harvest, fruit harvest, fall. Spring with its burst is over, summer has had its day, the scented grasses and clover are cut and dried into hay. The singing birds are silent and the swallows flown away. Post pugnam pausa fiat, Lord, we have made our choice. In the stillness of autumn quiet, we have heard the still small voice. We have sung, oh, where shall wisdom, thick paper, folio, voice. Let it not all be sadness, not omnia vanitas. Stir up a little gladness to lighten the TB crass. Send us that little summer that comes with Martinmas, when still the cloudlet dapples the windless cobalt blue, and the scent of gathered apples fills all the storerooms through. The gossamer silvers the bramble, the lawns are gemmed with dew. An end of tombstone latinity, stir up sober mirth. 25th after Trinity, kneel with the listening earth. Behind the Advent trumpets, they are singing Emmanuel's birth. Now, that's a good old-fashioned Church of England prayer book kind of thing, and I love it. He also wrote a lovely one about an old man going to church on Christmas Day, and all his relatives are dead. He's the only one left. But I could go on all night. But no, this is the book. If I went to a desert island, I would take the Oxford Book of 20th Century English verse. And as I say, it always opens on the poem, The Burning of the Leaves by Lawrence Binyon. And another time, I'll tell you why that poem's important to me.
Well, it depends how long it would take you, but we've got probably just enough time if you're minded to tell us.
Yeah, well, I've always been lucky with poems. I've found them when I needed them, and I've had a lot of melancholy and sorrow because of the way I've lived, the choices I've made, the mistakes I've made, the people I've let down. And I was in a particularly low state one day, and Larkin's book opened, and The Burning of the Leaves. It's partly my complicated relationship with my own religious history. The place I was sent to as a wee boy to train for the priesthood, Kelham, which is now no longer, and my affection and nostalgia for that. And I kept going back, trying to figure out why my life worked the way it did. And this poem helped me. It's called The Burning of the Leaves. I thought it was actually just about autumn, but in fact, it was written during the Blitz in World War II. And it was, Lawrence Binyon was an interesting poet, son of a Church of England vicar. And he wrote it in a sense, partly in response. He's the man, by the way, that we hear in Armistice Sunday, they shall grow not old as we that are left grow old. Age shall not wither them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun, and in the morning we will remember them. Those are his words about World War I. This is about World War II, but a poem is never just about any one thing. It's what the reader brings to it. And this, I read this when I needed it, and it saved me. Now is the time for the burning of the leaves. They go to the fire. The nostril pricks with smoke, wandering slowly into a weeping mist. Brittle and blotched, ragged and rotten sheaves. A flame seizes the smouldering ruin and bites on stubborn stalks that crackle as they resist. The last hollyhock's fallen tower is dust. All the spices of June are a bitter reek. All the extravagant riches spent and mean, all burns. The reddest rose is a ghost. Sparks whirl up to expire in the mist. The wild fingers of fire are making corruption clean. And this is the verse. Now is the time for stripping the spirit bare. Time for the burning of days ended and done. Idle solace of things that have gone before. Rootless hopes and fruitful and fruitless desire are there. Let them go to the fire with never a look behind. The world that was ours is a world that is ours no more. They will come again, the leaf and the flower, to arise from squalor of rottenness into the old splendor, and magical sense to a wandering memory bring. The same glory to shine upon different eyes. Earth cares for her own ruins, not for ours. Nothing is certain, only the certain spring. And that came to me when I needed it. And that's why it's got this wee stick of lavender in it, and it always opens. Yeah, this is the book I take with me.
That's beautiful. Richard, thank you so much for everything that you've shared tonight. It's provocative, lamentful, insightful, hopeful, all of those things all together in only the way that poetry can be, really. Thank you so much. Friends, the last voice you'll hear tonight, except your own, will be my colleague Jackie, who's going to come on in a moment. Do look out on our website for further events that we'll be hosting. We're starting to get to grips with how to do these things now. Mm-hmm. It's wonderful to be able to have people like yourself, Richard, to do this. So thank you so much. I'd like to invite Jackie to unmute now and just give us a few words.
Well, it's been a lovely evening, hasn't it? And there are one or two people to thank. First of all, Adrian, for organising this event for our diary, as Simon said at the beginning. So thank you to you, Adrian. And we're most grateful to Sarah, who always works so hard behind the scenes to make these events happen. There are probably one or two other people to thank behind the scenes, but not least to those who've asked such thoughtful questions this evening. It's been much appreciated. And we're most grateful to you, Richard, of course, for sharing this time with us and for providing us with so much rich food for thought. I was intrigued to come across one reflection in your anthology where you question why writers feel this compulsion to write. It seems to be something of an agony, something to be wrestled with. I was quite fascinated by that. Indeed, I think you quote, I think it's George Orwell, who describes writing a book as horrible, like a bout of some painful disease. And I was also struck by the question you ask yourself in the book. Do I think the world, which is already drowning in words, needs to hear from me? Well, the answer is clearly yes, because just as you describe your struggles with the problem of existence and with religion, the problem of meaning, especially in the face of suffering and our mortality, I'm sure these are the things we wrestle with too in the PCN, and we're always grateful to receive wisdom and insight from those who are brave enough to express their struggles, particularly bare their souls through the written word. So we'd like to assure you, Richard, the answer is very much yes, it's been wonderful. We've been grateful to have the chance to hear from you tonight. But perhaps I could conclude this vote of thanks with just returning to something you said at the beginning, where you described what an anthology is. And you said it's a collection of flowers plucked from other people's gardens, a collection of poetic flowers that saved or enlarged the life of the reader. And indeed, many of us gathered here this evening may feel that our life has been enriched too by this collection of flowers that has washed over us. So thank you very much indeed for your time. It's been rather wonderful. I don't know how we can express our thanks, I don't think we can clap, but